Here we are once again, More People Podcasts. I'm your host, Andrew Fitzmaurice, joined today by Boyd Douglas-Davies. I'm not entirely sure how to introduce you because you've got a very long list of things to talk about, but we'll get onto that in a moment.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us, Boyd.
Pleasure. Good to be here.
So your background, I'm going to go back a bit further than I do perhaps with some guests. So we've got Hillview Garden Centres.
Yes, yeah.
For a long time.
That was quite a while, 9 years.
9 years there, 20 years at Webb's.
20 it was, yeah. 20 years almost to the day.
This might embarrass you adding these up, mightn't it? 3.5 years British Garden Centres.
Yes, yeah. More recently at BGC.
HTA in there as well. Was that concurrent with other jobs or was that separate?
Yes, no, that was during the time. So I joined the HTA board when I was in the last stages of Hillview, and then I was on the HTA through till September of this year.
Okay.
So 6 years on their board, 3 years as their president.
And now you are with your own managing consultancy and non-exec director positions. Is that the best way to sum it up?
Yep. So I'm running the Boyd Partnership, which is a horticultural-based consultancy providing support, advice, inspiration, criticism, whatever is required. And then on top of that, I've got the big role, which is the Environmental Horticulture Group. So I'm chairing that, which is a cooperation really of all the industry board and organisations, so the RHS, the HTA, Barley, Arboriculture, Chartered Institute of Horticulture. Every organisation in horticulture belongs to EHG, and our role in life there is to talk to government about the importance of environmental horticulture. So that is an interesting time and space to be in that at the moment. And then Greenfingers and the charity aspects of working with them and as their newly appointed chair.
What has changed? What has been the most significant evolution and change within this space since you started all those years ago to now?
I started in garden centres. That was, I grew up in garden centres. My father was a seedsman. He had shops. And if I go back to when he started, it was shops on the high street, which were sort of really a goods outlet for gardening with a small yard for selling plants and compost. We worked hard to make our money in the gardening season, and then we accepted that outside of that, you just hunkered down and you took as much as you could and you spent as little as possible. Nowadays, garden centres are a 363 organisation if they close Christmas and Boxing Day. Even now, garden centres are taking money on Christmas Day, the sales online. So that transition from a spring, early summer, middle of June, everything stops, to now an all year round industry. And as much as some people criticise and say, well, it's not about plants, it's still about plants, it's still about gardening. And now we can trade all year round, we can employ people all year round. So I think that's the biggest thing. We've become a much more robust industry. And then alongside that, there was a historical aging thing. You weren't old enough to garden almost. There was a point in your life when you discovered gardening, which actually was almost post-children, when they'd stop kicking a ball into every nice plant, they'd stop smashing your lawn up with a cricket bat, and they moved on, and then you almost became old enough to garden. You look at young people now enjoying houseplants, patio gardening, the whole activity now around creating a garden all above ground. Nothing, spade sales, lower, because you're not digging holes, you're planting everything in pots. So that's a real shift, and that's the last 5 years. That's COVID has brought a much bigger audience to horticulture, which is fantastic to see.
So is the nature of garden centres being less plant-centric today than they perhaps used to be, is that sad in some way, or is that the nature of the evolution of those retail spaces and you just go with it, that they are so much more multifunctional destinations that you do more than just plants?
It's wonderful because what it's doing is bringing people into a space at different times of year, and there's a danger they might discover plants for the first time. The amount of times that people say, oh, I haven't been here since I was a kid, and they're now bringing their kids to a grotto. And well, what's happened for the last 20 years? Where have you been? But nowadays they are coming back. So that experience of coming to a garden centre for something else, for food, where I've been this morning, from 9 o'clock, that restaurant was busy with people, but they've got to walk through a plant area to get to that restaurant. They've got to walk back out through a plant area. There's a danger they might just pick up a plant. So I think the whole interaction of other business models around the plants, it only strengthens the opportunity to sell plants. I get really cross actually when people say, oh yeah, December's the best month of the year because our Christmas department's fantastic. What that's telling me is you're not doing a good enough job with your plants in May, because actually that December customer should convert to a May. If you're really working hard and have got your offer right, those people should be back. So I think the addition of non-gardening to the site is actually strengthening gardening. I don't think it's detracting from it at all. I think used correctly, it's an opportunity. And if we put half of the effort into dressing our plant departments that we put into creating our Christmas departments, which some people do really well, wow, the business will only boom.
When you own and run a garden centre or a group of garden centres and you're pulled in lots of different directions, you're spinning all these different plates. We were talking earlier about we've got to consider the quality of the coffee, we've got to consider the quality of the food and the offering in the restaurant, the environment in the restaurant, the landscaping. Then you go into your homewares and you're thinking about the quality of products in there. But then you can't forget that you've got a greenhouse over here for indoor plants. So, and then you've got the outdoor growing areas where things may be blowing over and they're not in season, or it's not as pretty and nice to be out there because it's November and not June.
Yeah.
You're going to be very busy and pulled in different directions. How do you go about, whether you're now advising as a non-exec or whether you were there doing it as a CEO of a business, how do you spin all those plates and keep them all in the air?
I should have been a better juggler, because I mean, juggling is what it's all about. But I found when I started Hillview, that was 2011, I'd left Webbs, where we had a fantastic team of people. I'd had 20 years there, left it very happily, and decided to go off on this adventure of my own. And straight away I bought one garden centre, and then 6 months later I had my second, and over 4 years got to 11 centres. And very quickly I learned that actually I couldn't do it all. And I had to surround myself with like-minded people, but people who had a confidence to not just be yes people. That was the biggest issue. Having a load of people who just agree with everything I said would have been a disaster. But I had a group of people around me who understood what I wanted, but were happy to critique it and check it and actually have a hearty debate. And I always said to people, I don't care how much we discuss it, as long as we agree on the action when we finish the discussion and we walk out the room and we're both on the same direction. And what I ended up trying to say to everybody is that my job is to be the train driver who's taking a train down the tracks, and I want you on the train doing what you're doing, but I also need somebody out front to make sure that the track's clear. I need somebody at the back to make sure that the train's been stoked. I need people in the middle to make sure that the organisation is working, the computers are working. And what we're going to do is set the widest possible tracks we can, and we're all going to hurtle down there as fast as we can. But if there's a real pinch point or a real tricky area, we're going to narrow the tracks down and we're going to go slower, and we're going to make sure that we're still all on board. But we need to recognise where we might crash and where we can actually put our foot down. But as a team, we've got to be absolutely on board. And that was the secret, was actually having a great person who understood the catering, a great plantsman who understood plant retailing, but also knew what quality looked like, knew the industry, knew where to get good plants from. Plants are a really tricky one because you're so weather dependent. Most departments is quite easy because you make a decision in January and you buy Christmas decorations in February and they come in August, and then you live with it. With most plants, you're actually trying to react on a much shorter window. So you've got to have a great knowledge of the industry, almost second sense of what's coming with the weather tomorrow. And when it goes mad, you've got to be there. When it stops, you've got to stop it. But you've got to get a load of good people around you. And I was very fortunate at Hillview. I had a team, the senior leadership team, who were absolutely brilliant at just getting it. In the early days, they criticised me because they felt that I was this complete loony this master of everything and complete control freak. And we worked out we needed the toolbox, we called it, and we wrote the toolbox, which was actually what I felt and wanted, but in written form, lots of pictures as well. What looks good, what doesn't look good. That's great, that's unacceptable. So the standards and expectations were set, and then we could all work to those. And everybody knew where they stood. And that's, I think, the big secret, because then you're actually able to forward think about what's next in the business, because actually today has been dealt with and you're working on tomorrow and the future. And that gave me the freedom to go off to explore for new ideas, to go off to different trade shows, to go and look at different business operations. We went and looked at soft play centres and built very successful soft play in the garden centres. And frankly, I became an absolute expert on soft play. Now, when I was at Pershaw back in the 80s, soft play wasn't even a discussion. They weren't talking about that on the garden centre management course. And I think that's the other secret to certainly garden centre retailing. You've always got to be open to change. If you keep on thinking that we're just going to go on press repeat year after year, it doesn't work. If you can't do better tomorrow than you did yesterday, frankly, don't bother coming in, because your time is done with me. That's my view, is we could always do better.
So when it comes to imparting that wisdom as a non-exec, if that's the right term, non-exec director, is it that you've been there and got the T-shirt, and most of the challenges that these companies on a similar journey you've already seen them, so it's a knowing nod that I
Yeah.
remember that, I've been
I made
there.
that mistake.
Or are some of the challenges brand new, which leaves you scratching your head a little bit?
After 40 years, not often a new one, but they are usually a repeat of some mistake I've been known to have made in the past. And that actually, one of the things is, don't be afraid to make a decision, isn't it? Because actually, somebody who only makes 10 decisions a day probably will get all 10 right, because they're allowing themselves an hour per decision. Somebody who makes 100 decisions a day will get some of those wrong. But the key is to learn from that and not repeat the mistake, isn't it? And actually what I do often is encourage people to be a bit braver and actually go, well, what's the worst that can happen? And as long as we can deal with the worst that can happen, it's not a problem. Yeah, if we go and buy a load of them, they don't sell, can we sell them for what we paid for them? Yes, we will sell them for what we paid. Well, that's not a disaster then, is it? Let's make sure we do that. Let's always have that emergency exit route. So usually I'm dragging back on some of my experiences, hopefully things I've learned and made successful, and then sharing that.
Tell us about Greenfingers. You're wearing your pin today, as you
always wear my pin.
Usually do.
Yeah.
Tell us about Greenfingers.
So, well, Greenfingers is a charity. It's been going 25 years this year. It's in its 25th anniversary year. It started off as the Greenfingers Appeal, and it fundamentally creates gardens for children in hospices. That's the simple statement. It's so much more than that. What it's doing is creating a garden at a children's hospice for all the people that use the hospice. So the child that's sadly in the hospice, the parents, the brothers, the sisters, the grandparents, the aunts, the friends, the staff, the therapists, the people around that child. So a Greenfingers garden now is a place for therapy. So there is actually treatment spaces. It's a place for reflection. It's a place to go and play, because you're in a hospice, your 7-year-old brother and sisters with you, you can go out and have some playtime with them. It's a place to maybe grow some food. It's a place just to relax. So these Greenfingers gardens are delivering all of that to a hospice who frankly never have enough money to do anything with the outdoor space. We see a lot of it at the moment. They struggle to fund the internal activity. So if we can raise money and deliver a garden that provides all that for them, we know it makes a huge difference. What the child experiences is a moment in time when they may enjoy that garden for a few moments. What it delivers to the wider network is a lifetime of memories. And that's actually what's really important, is actually the garden is a place that can be remembered. I've often told a story, and if I may, I'll tell it again, because this was for me 10 years ago, a significant moment. I literally 10 years ago went to a fundraising dinner, and a youngish lady stood and talked about her daughter who died in a hospice with a garden built by Greenfingers. She had her 8-year-old son, a lad called Billy, was there with her. And Billy talked very briefly. He was only 8, but he was a lively little lad from the East End of London. This was in London. And he talked about the garden with his mum very briefly. After the formal part, I met mum and Billy. And he said, "Hello, mister. Did you build the garden my sister died in?" Now that, I was like, I don't know how to answer that for starters, because that was suddenly a very emotional question. Well, I didn't build it, Billy, but I know about the garden. What was it like? And he said one word to me. He said, "Terrific." And for him, the horrible, to me as a grown-up, the emotional strife of thinking about what had happened, but for him, the memory of his sister and the fun they'd had in those last few days and hours, because there was a garden. I thought, that's actually what the garden does. It delivers something that's a memory for life, not just a moment in time. And that's what Greenfingers does. It raises the money, it designs the gardens, it project manages, it ensures the garden gets built. It's very difficult nowadays to build a garden with all the specification requirements, accessibility, safety and things. It adds up, and we get phenomenal support from the industry and beyond. We get some big high street names and brands are supporting us alongside manufacturers, growers, retailers. It's wonderful to get the support, and very humbled to be invited to be their chair. And I took that on just 10 days ago and are now chairing the charity and leading it on for the next 5 years or so, hopefully.
What a cause. Incredible.
Yeah,
I think it's
good.
one of those charities, and there are lots of charities obviously that have worthy causes. Some are more well known than others. I think Greenfingers is well known in our garden centre supply chain space, and we see it at events. But I guess the more we can do to bang the drum, to your point, to get it known in the wider industry, the better health it'll be. Boyd, I could talk to you all day, and maybe we have to do a 2-parter at some point in the future, but it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Look forward to it.